I'm now joined by author, historian and journalist Gershom Gorenberg, who recently visited the ruins of Kibbutz Be'eri, one of the communities on the Gaza border where a massacre took place on October the 7th. Gershom, thank you very much for joining me on the programme. I know that it's incredibly difficult for you to talk about what you saw when you went to the kibbutz, but I also know that you have said that you will do so. It's important to do so. So you made effectively a pilgrimage there. When you went to see it, what did you see?
Well, I went to Be'eri because I felt it was my responsibility as a journalist and as a historian to see what could be seen there. I've been a journalist for 40 years. This is probably the most horrific scene I've spot or a scene that I've witnessed. The civilians aren't there anymore. You have to cross a military roadblock to get in because the area isn't safe. It's very close to the border. Be'eri was one of the first spots to be invaded by the Hamas terrorists on the morning of October 7th. They broke through the fence on the western edge of the community. The house nearest the corner where they broke in is riddled with gunfire. Apparently somebody letting off automatic bursts of gunfire because the bullet holes are very close together. Many of the houses are burned. The attackers lit the houses on fire from within in order to force people out. Some people stayed inside and were burnt to death. Some people left the houses and were either shot or taken hostage. Perhaps the most difficult sight was entering one house. As we came to the house, on the deck outside the front door, there is still resting there are a couple of knives, a kitchen cleaver, and a hammer, and all of this in a very large pool of dried blood. Just within the front door, there was a kitchen knife this long and a meter-wide pool of a tremendous amount of blood where another person obviously had been killed. And then inside, there's a living room. You know, there's a couch, there's a love seat, there's throw pillows, there's flowers still in a vase, a normal, living room of normal people that were invaded and clearly murdered there. Each of these small homes has a reinforced room for shelter from rocket attacks. Very often those are the rooms of children, so that the children wouldn't have to run for cover when the sirens went off that Hamas was firing rockets from Gaza. The door of this particular house, the lock had been shattered by gunfire in order to open it, and inside the room there was a child's mattress and box springs entirely soaked in blood. Just a horrific sight. Really a nightmarish sight. Elsewhere, we entered houses. Sometimes they were completely black inside. Sometimes the roofs were gone because the roof beams had burnt away in these fires. You see the remains of people's normal life, the computer table, the photo albums, and again, signs of murder having taken place there. Pools of blood, especially in the corners of these rooms that were supposed to be shelters, on the mattresses and so forth.
Gershom,
outside
Gershom, sorry to interrupt you, but may I just ask you just very briefly, because unfortunately time is passing. Why do you think it's important as a journalist, as a human being, to describe this so that people can't really escape the brutality, this hideous day, the massacre, and man's inhumanity to man, and for many people, history repeating itself? Why do you think it's important that you tell this story?
Well, I think that it's vitally important that as we look at this terrible situation and the terrible fighting inside of Gaza and the cost inside of Gaza, to remember the cost to Palestinian lives as well inside of Gaza, to remember how this began, the act of absolute cruelty and evil aimed at civilians that set this conflict off. It's absolutely clear that the attackers intended to murder civilians. At Kibbutz Be'eri, a community of 1,100 people, 85 people were murdered, and another 30 are missing, either completely unknown circumstances or hostages in Gaza. So that's a tenth of this community is gone, and that's what started the war. And I would underline that it's very clear that Hamas intended to start a war with these actions, that it understood that there would be an Israeli response, and that essentially it was also sacrificing the lives of Palestinians in Gaza in order to rekindle the conflict and essentially
I thank you so much. I thank you for putting yourself through the ordeal of telling this story. I think it's vitally important that you did so. I'm extremely honoured that you chose my programme to do it on, and I send you all good wishes. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up after the break,